everyone. I'm Wendy Liebmann, CEO and Chief Shopper at WSL Strategic Retail, and this is Future Shop. This is where I talk to innovators, disruptors, and iconoclasts about the future of retail. My guests today to talk about all this are Oskar Kaszubski and Chris Perry from Firstmovr, that they designate as a satellite center of excellence for CPG, e-commerce education, and change management. And I'll tell you a bit about that in the future. Oskar's the Chief Growth Officer, Chris is the Chief Learning Officer, and they are on a mission to empower first movers to win in this disruptive marketplace. Between the two of them, they have the absolutely best experience of working in both big CPGs like Kellogg's and Kimberly-Clark and Reckitt to startups and digital marketing and e-commerce. And I have to tell you, if anybody's going to help educate me on all of this, it's these two fellas. I first met Chris through the digital underground, which is sort of literally and figuratively this sort of loosely formed cabal of digital whiz kids who I stalk on a regular basis, and then through him, Oskar. So after that long introduction, welcome to you both.
Thank you very much, Wendy. We're really excited to be here.
Yeah, great to have you both. Great to have you both. Thank you for joining me today. So why now Firstmovr? I mean, you've come from big companies and smaller. You know, why? I understand the urgency. I need to know more, but how did you start the company? Why did you start the company? And what are you focused on at this very moment?
A first mover has to light the way. That's always been true. Someone lit the path, cleared the path for the rest of the group to go forward. But what we find is first movers in today's environment, whether they're the digital leaders, the media leaders, the e-commerce leaders, the artificial intelligence leaders, whatever, and it might be somebody wearing many hats, have to not only light the way for the next change, which is literally on the heels of the one we're already trying to activate, but then also somehow at the same time, with single human beings trying to do a lot of this, bring everybody else along over the change curve. And so what we've kind of found is the first movers need a first mover, somebody that has their back to both either tackle the organization while they go figure out what comes next in their own right, or to help them figure out what comes next. And so, obviously that's a tall order to swallow, but we've really tried to tackle that through both, industry education and the democratization of kind of thought leadership, but what we like to call practice leadership, because thoughts are great, but we want to make sure we're actually going to be able to go do this stuff. Custom training and certification for CPGs and shopper agencies and retailers. And then a lot of the work that Oskar leads is the change management, capability assessment, benchmarking, strategy, development, and implementation. And
basically, I constantly want to be in the future. Like, I would have a massive joy if somebody could send me 50 years, forward, and I would have to figure out all the new technology that the future world would have. I mean, I would be one of those people that freeze me today, wake me up, in the future, and I'm ready to go just suck in all of this new great technology, right? But in order to just show that vision, we also have to build a bridge to that vision. And this is why Chris is always such a great partner and a forward partner, because his mastery of storytelling, of marketing, and basically setting up the ship, that the ship can leave Earth and go to the Mars, is so critical for a large organization. Because when we have a lot of those more like inspiration, future looking leaders, a lot of the times when they come into the organization, it's hard for them to tell that story. And after a while, after like 6 to 12 months, they lose the new car smell. So the new ideas that they actually bring into the organization, if they are not grounded, if there is not a proper change management, they basically become ineffective.
Yeah. What's interesting about that to me, I just spent the last few days with some of our team, with one of our retail clients, and this was a whole new retail media organization, and I want to talk to you about retail media as we go along. And this was a new team of 40 people, still hiring, some from the established organization, some from the outside. And we brought them together the totally new head of this organization, coming from another retailer, brought them together to sort of immerse them in, the map, where we're going, what we're trying to do. And then we immerse them in retail innovation, in the market, to see what's emerging through the lens of the shopper, because I don't know how to ground the future unless it's, what will benefit the shopper, and not just how do I monetize retail media and the various touch points. But what struck me in the conversation over the 2 days was very much what you just said. Here's somebody who's come in from the outside, is forming a totally new organization in a very established corporation. And I think I know he was recognizing that you have to help the whole organization think about the change, while on the other side, you're moving to the future. So that seems to me like just something that you two are living every day.
And we don't have all the answers either, but we're that constant being in an educator role forces you to constantly relearn so that you can help the next person learn even better. And so it's not, unfortunately, not all leaders or practitioners get to practice relearning all the time because they're supposed to be doing. You do learn when you do, but sometimes you have to have somebody helping you kind of air cover over top, actually forcing the learning. And that's something that we're trying to do, but we get to kind of do it, to your point, every day. Which is exciting.
Well, and I do think the other piece to this, and that's why I was so eager to talk to you both, is this. It just seems to me the complexity of what we're all trying to do here. I mean, it's not that retail, from our perspective, wasn't complicated before. It's not that big CPG brands or small brands didn't have a complex and changing approach to business, but it wasn't quite so fast-moving or fast-changing. The consumer as shopper was not so quick to change because they didn't have access to so many things. They were dependent on the big companies to say, here's a new brand, here's a new product, it's on this shelf in this retailer. Now, the marketplace has changed so much, the tools and technologies have changed. So the complexity of clarifying that and bringing the learning to life seems to me hugely, even more critical now than maybe it even was 5 or 10 years ago. And I will tell you what struck me, and I'm going to show you a really bad photocopy, an old world photocopy. So this is something that in our seditious digital underground thing, and if Chris and Oskar let us, we'll share a link to this. But what these two fellows are really good at is taking these sort of complex ecosystems and telling simplified stories, not simple, but simplified stories. Where do you begin in this conversation when you bring a group of companies together or a company together? And how do I focus here?
So we put that diagram together, and if you get a chance to look, it's a free resource we put out. It was just to help make sense of what we're helping brands on every day, and we're working with a lot of these different solution providers and insights providers. It's a North America edition of what we call our Trilliant Value Scape for digital tech capabilities. We had to layer now a multi-dimensional set of capabilities on top of what was a more established, predictable, more linear way to market and way to get insights back from that market to keep going back and forth. It was kind of a ping pong game versus now it's a pinball game all over the place in multiple 3D. And so when we were trying to lay this out, we laid out the different flows of what in this digital world needs to get from point A to point B to point C. And it very quickly became this kind of trilliant diamond shape, which is really why we named it that way. So we've really tried to, that was one of the big areas this year we wanted to tackle to help companies and the solution providers help each other.
What's step one, what's step two, and what are the biggest mistakes people are making in all of this?
Yeah, so if you think about it as, what's our approach, right? Because we are fundamentally practitioners and storytellers. So we are not doing this assessment from a technology point of view, right? We are just looking for an end state business, in terms of what the change management this needs to drive. So that's why we put kind of shopper in the center, because for us, it's a little bit like, very similar to what Steve Jobs was saying, that people might not know what they want in the future. We might have to design that future for them. Because if I would tell you that, in 20 years, we might have androids walking and doing our shopping, that concept would be completely foreign to you, unless, again, like me, you watch a lot of science fiction, right? if I will tell you that, the best idea that we might have in the next 5 years is to put ChatGTP plus text to shop that Walmart has, so you actually have an assistant that you can have a conversation, a lot of people would not be ready for it yet. If you think about it, e-commerce is actually very simple. E-commerce and digital commerce has been always about convenience. So we are making things more convenient to people. It's really about shortening the time between desire and delight, right? But what we haven't done as an industry, we haven't really thought about few things. Number one is we haven't thought about how much decisions people have to make every day and how much distraction people have every day, right? Because we are bombarded by the data, but we are constantly like struggling to find relevant insights, and we can be basically swayed by any content. And then, we have a big issue with echo chamber because all those algorithms are basically serving us similar content. So we are like being pegged into a little bit of a hole that it's hard for us to get out, right? And that's why it's kind of important to start actually valuing people's time. Like, how can we actually use the technology to crawl back some of that time? How can we create shopping experiences that are more relevant to us, right, as people? We have to actually start thinking about people and who they are and start building a profile to basically, when they walk in to the store, that they see the relevant items first, and then they can actually spend time on discovery of new products and brands. That might be possible, for example, launching maybe something similar, which Apple is launching this year, which is, those AR glasses where you can actually walk in the store and all the items that are relevant to you, they're highlighted first before the discovery, right? The same thing on e-commerce. Jeff Bezos actually, did a lot of great things for e-commerce, but this whole notion of Amazon of being a store of everything, it's a little bit problematic because we are just bombarded of millions of items that are, again, some of them might not be relevant to us. Most of them will not be relevant to us, right? So we actually have to fulfill the last thing, which is, the last thing of digital commerce that we haven't been able to conquer, which is personalization. And how can we actually strike the balance between showing only relevant, items, right, for you, but avoiding that echo chamber that you're not going to end up in only the items that you would, and you will stop actually, experiencing items from other categories because the algorithm will deem it not relevant to you. So we have to sort out this future, but that's why it's fascinating. And that's why we always keep the shopper first to trying to figure out is like, what is the next step? Now, what I would say, what's really exciting about the last few weeks, that a lot of people are laughing when I say that, but I honestly think that ChatGTP, in a way, it's our second COVID moment. And we're going to see a massive acceleration of digital IT, AI, in the coming months. And the reason for it is because people realize that, last year, all of the tech stocks were getting beat up, and suddenly people realized that the future without tech not necessarily exists. But I truly believe that people actually don't see it yet, that we are on the cusp of another iPhone moment where we can actually use the technology to help us, where our actually artificial assistants like, Google Assistant or Siri, etc., or Samsung Bixby can be actually useful to you, and you can have a regular conversations with them, and they can be actually helpful when it comes into day-to-day tasks.
Yeah, and I think that whole issue around time and understanding the inherent value to, our bias is all shopper, as you know. It's that, how do we build that insight out of all the data that we have, right? And that essence of time becomes just the most powerful value proposition, even as it connects to how much money I can save, or can I get to work or my other work, or help my family, and on so many issues. So I do see where your vision of that 20 years ahead, 30 years ahead is there. It feels like it's right. It is at the moment, beyond saying, and I dare not say it, Alexa, she'll turn on in a minute, right? Or Siri or Google or whoever, to your point. But taking it from the novelty of turn on the music or put it on the shopping list and things like that, of that value proposition. So I think your immediacy of vision is very powerful in all of that. But within that context, how do we now, you're going in, you know, Chris, you said you're going in to do a mutual client's big training session, sales meeting next week. How do we have to think about that within the structure of establishing an organization and educating an organization? I mean, does that pull people through and they say, I get it, so now I have to get all the basics right? Or does that distract them and senior management say, oh, we must be doing this bright, shiny thing?
So, that's a great question. So I'll come right back to education, because I think this ties to, like, honestly, this trillion diamond in the capabilities are one piece of change that we actually have. Another piece of work we recently put out was our change management kind of framework, and we call it Sheared. There are kind of 8 factors of successful change from a practitioner's view, not some, and I'm not knocking it, but not an academic consulting framework that looks good, but I can't figure out how to activate. There are 8 real factors that you can qualitatively, quantitatively, with tools, just verbally discuss, somewhat assess an organization and how well they've actually pivoted for change. One of those is capabilities, which honestly, that trillion value scape obviously falls into, that enables strategies, enables resources, optimizes the investment, may be used by headcount and the focus leadership structure. But one of the kind of the way I see those two things fall together, and where the education piece comes in, is education is a huge part of change management in general. The funny thing about it, or the ironic thing, is it's only as useful as the people who are learning are held accountable to use it. What we always say is, like, we can bring you an end-to-end program. It'll be robust. It can be, it can leverage assessments to determine where people start. It can be multi-tier. There can be incentives and badges, and the quality of the content will be amazing. It'll be tuned to you, custom, all that. And then you get to the end, and then they're like, so, like,
now what? Right.
So what? Right.
I
love that training.
Right.
Did I have to?
Right.
Was it in my performance review? No.
Right.
Did it get me promoted? Maybe not. Is it in my actual KPIs? Do I get bonused on it? Indirectly, but not officially, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to say this is simple, but some of what we put in the trillion in the middle are the shopper insights, the sales and share, and those leading metrics, the digital shelf metrics, among many, because those give you the pieces of, like, what are the things that lead to the things I want? What helps? The insights help me be even smarter about that. And then those help direct me on which better capabilities I actually need, and then what I need to be trained on. But I only bring that. Education is only as strong as the enablement of that education. And so, and that's something we try to push, so that when we do education or advisory, it can stick and actually be applied beyond the training itself.
Yeah, it's interesting, again, you say that, because it's in my head of the work we've done this week ourselves is, and again, we have a very strong bias. We always say, is the shopper in the room? If you follow the shopper, you'll see the future in very pragmatic ways. And so one of the things we often do in our work is, yes, we've got all this data and insights, and aren't we brilliant, and science and art, all of that. But we find, until you can get the executives to actually remember that they in their own lives are actually also shoppers, and get them out of the, away from the desk, out of the door, that it's so easy, to your point, for them to forget what they really need to do in the end, to sell one more thing in the basket, all of that, new fabulous products, bells and whistles. And what struck me, we usually give people a homework assignment up front, which is usually driven by some kind of shopper-centric experience. And for this group, we did that. We said, okay, you're now in the, retail media, huge new fabulous organization. It's not enough just to monetize all these things. They got to be worth it, worth it as in relevant to the shopper. It's much of what you were saying, Oskar. So we gave them that example, and we said, go off and think about something you bought recently, whatever, and come back and tell us about that process and what really worked for you. And we had people talking about everything from going to Disney and all the touch points of virtual engagement, from their, whether it's an Apple Watch or Disney band or whatever, and all the personalization you talked about, Oskar, to, somebody talking about, going and buying electronics at the local whatever store. And so to your point, that feels like that's almost the beginning. And what you're saying is that if it's not relevant to the work they're going to do, it's just training for training. And the complexity of what we're doing anyway is so crazy. So Oskar, how do you, as you think about the future here and who's getting it right, are there companies, I don't know if you want to name names, but are there companies we should look to and say, these people are getting it right?
Yeah, so there are a few things that are happening, and that's my actually suggestion for you. Mm-hmm. I honestly think a lot of the people can understand the singular experience that they are having. So if you ask them to buy something on Amazon, right, they will go through this exercise and tell you all about the experience. But I think we also have to augment this by saying that in e-commerce, if you start with one order, once you actually progress through all the stages, you'll figure out where to buy from where. You might be placing 150 to 160 orders per year, right? And a lot of those executives sometimes miss the notion because they are not shoppers. It's usually their spouse that is helping with shop, or they have some sort of a help. That basically, we also have to do this at scale. This is not about a singular experience that they are having. This is not about, for example, using GoPuff to deliver beer after 10 p.m., right? This is all about really understanding that this is going to become the part of your life going forward. Yes, you can still walk to the store, but when you walk to the store, a lot of the times you're going to actually reach for your phone. And even if an item is not a top seller in the store, in the online, you might actually be doing research about this top item on your phone because there might be still digital shelf assets for it, ratings and reviews, right? Mm-hmm. So I think fundamentally, we really got to kind of look at from change management's perspective, what really needs to happen and how do we need to kind of continuously to educate them, to tell them that this is not one and dusted, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what we see when we actually doing a lot of those advisory and we actually talking to executives. They are thinking that change is actually, going to take the next 3 months and they are done. While we know that we have to kind of build new muscle. This is like almost like you're trying to reinvent your life and trying to eat healthier or maybe, work out, maybe, go to the gym, etc. Like you fundamentally are changing your lifestyle and you have to embed this within your organization. You have to encourage. And the beginnings are always tough, right? Everybody says it takes 21 days to make a habit, etc. But you have to kind of embrace this and get people to experiment with other ways of actually, for example, shopping, how consumers are actually shopping, right? Mm-hmm. Where I think we're going to have a massive issue in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, I would even say 5 years, is that the future is going to be very technology centric, and it will require us to have much higher digital fluency versus what we actually were asked to do the last 10 years. Because to be honest, probably the biggest change that we've seen in the last 10, 15 years, where we suddenly had to jump from dumb phones to smartphones, right? And you had to pick up those new skills. Before that, if you actually look at 80s and 90s, when a lot of the workplaces were introducing computers, we had to go from a paper to a computer, right? So now we're going to be asked to actually, use, like, how do you actually use Word or Excel that is infused with AI? And yes, you can do it the old way, but not necessarily going to be as effective as someone that can actually use AI to enhance their productivity using those tools, right? The same thing can happen with VR, with AR, anything that's going to come into the future, or even, when we actually get into robotics. So we're going to have to adapt a little bit quicker. And where we always are recommending to the executive is you have to really understand this, that we live in a little bit of a paradigm. And it's I question it all the time, right? On one hand, we have all this wonderful technology, but we are still working 40 hours per week or even more. Elon Musk wants people work 60 hours per week.
I'd like
right?
40 hours a week.
So,
just get over yourself.
Yeah. So the thing what it is like we're actually not benefiting from that technology because the CPGs, in a lot of the times, they are trying to shrink down, because if you actually look at that average CPGs, they've been in the high of their hiring maybe 10, 15 years ago. When I was at Mondelez, they were always talking about this golden eagle at front of the East Hanover building and helicopters landing on the roof. Those times are over, right? Those times no longer exist.
Oh, you don't have one of those? Oh, no.
Yeah, exactly. We don't, right?
Right.
So the thing, so think about it is like we live in this paradigm where we actually have an influx of technology that is making us more effective, but on the same time, because the large corporations are actually lowering their staffing and they are asking more people to do more, it's a little bit of a crazy cycle where there is not really a time to say the digital fluency is going to be absolutely critical in the future. That you actually would benefit if your people would spend more time on learning new skills, right? Versus just trying to, be in that constant hamster wheel and doing all of those things, et cetera, right? Yeah. So we have to almost kind of open up people's mind is that we have to have a little bit of a different approach, that the future is going to ask a lot from us mentally to be able to adapt. And there is going to be organization that will embrace AI. Will be organization that will embrace learning. And those organizations will be much better suited to win in the future versus the ones that think, we can just cut costs and, use tech and it's all good. It's okay, right? Yeah. So that's an interesting kind of the way the world is being kind of developed. And how are we going to reconcile this? It's going to be absolutely critical for our success.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about what you both said here as we come to the end is that, I've always stunned that we don't have enough time. We always talk about insights, right? What does it mean? What's the next, how are we getting to Mars or, whatever it is. And so we still spend so much time looking at data and more data and more data, and whether we're using AI, whatever we're using. And it seems to me our clients and the audiences that we work with, that they're not helping people in terms of saying, okay, here's the data and here's the way to look at it and here's the way to manipulate it. But then what does it all mean? What's an insight? I am stunned at the level of people that we work with at the level who have no training in terms of developing an insight that becomes really powerful in driving the business. So I really embrace what you've been saying there, because to take those digital tools and all that expertise that can enable, and then educating people to think in this new ecosystem, whatever we want to call it, that becomes so, rather than be afraid that kids are going to, steal their papers, write new papers, not be writing new papers, but rather enable that. So there's some of the things that I think about for the future. What will that theoretically and practically free us up to do so that we can think differently about what comes next? So
it isn't simple, and it probably doesn't even seem like that much of a mind-blowing experience to hear. But we are what we measure. So if we measure the right things, even the new right things that you're not measured on now, even if you have no idea how to do them and you don't have the right money in the right places or the right headcount or the right talent or the right capability partners, you will go get them, because you will have to, because otherwise you failed. And you won't want to fail because we're not allowed to fail, obviously, long term. But sales and share is not something you control. That's like weight loss. Like, I don't control weight loss. I control calorie consumption and burning in my personal life. So sales and share is the outcome of a great strategy and leading metrics against that very specific strategy. So if I want to grow by building baskets, then I'm going to pull very specific levers to influence whatever data I can get that would tell me that I was successful in building baskets versus repeat rate or net new shoppers. And so we try to make, like, instead of just saying, let's talk about e-commerce, and which obviously then could be just this blind growth opportunity. Mm-hmm. We really try to train them on how does it work, but how should you be thinking about this with what you can actually control?
Now that makes sense of the trillion piece, which says, how do I absorb this? How do I deliver the shiny diamond with the shopper in the lens? Again, our bias. And then what part can I really think about as what goal, how can I deliver against this piece, and then how do all the pieces together fit to deliver that? As I say, I was totally intrigued by taking something very complex and thinking about how do I educate, make sense of, and turn this into money within an organization, and all these organizations that are really working very hard to try to figure out what this new world will look like. So thank you both for this. This was a beginning of what I know will be a continuing conversation underground with our digital troops, and above ground and in the ether as we move forward on this. So
thank you.
Thank you.
So here's the thing. Clearly Chris and Oskar are hugely passionate about the sort of education of companies in terms of how do you create a structure and an organization and a continuing process to understand this new broad, what I call an ecosystem. For us, and you've heard me say this 1,000 times, it's all about, is the shopper in the center of it? And in fact, that's the only way I believe you can begin. And I think all our work, our data and insights, our inspiration, grounding our clients in the shopper at the beginning is the only way to keep people focused. I think what Chris said, which is interesting as you make your way through this complexity, is little bites. What do I need to do? What's the key objective I could work on, whether it's trips or basket or level of engagement or some other growth metric, and then work around that. And then what are all the digital tools and processes and the analytics and the technologies I can use to get there? What's all the information I can use to actually get there? And then I've got some success. And then I bring you and you and you and you and build these teams to create really relevant output that adds value ultimately to the shopper. Yes, you've got it. And then to the organization at large, at least from our point of view at WSL, it's always, if I follow the shopper, I will see the future. And if I satisfy their needs in simple and complicated ways, if I save them time, as Oskar said, how do I do that? What do I need to do it? And what basic and fancy thing, tools, thinking, intelligence, artificial or human, will help us get there. So a lot of conversation here, a lot of things for us all to think about in all of this, but stay tuned. See you in the future.